I think the greatest book that's not been written and never will be written is The Greatest Cheats in Motorsport. Some of the stories I've heard over the years are so good. Just because what they do is they reveal the competitive nature of human beings, but also ingenuity. You will see people at their most ingenious when they're cheating, not when they're abiding by the rules.
Right.
And Formula One is about the phrase that the great Mark Donoghue, one of your great drivers, Mark Donoghue was a Can-Am driver who did a bit of Formula One as well. He coined the phrase the unfair advantage, which is a phrase I love because it just defines so many sports. Whether we like it or not, we're searching for the unfair advantage, aren't we? And in motorsport, some of the cheats I've heard about are just brilliant.
Like what kind of stuff?
So I can remember hearing a guy called Wyn Percy, who was a touring car driver from the UK in the sort of 60s and 70s, describing how there was a famous commentator we had called Murray Walker. He was the voice of our motorsport for 40 years. He had a very distinctive voice. He was a lovely man, met him a few times. And he'd often describe Wyn Percy getting out of this particular car he'd been racing, covered in sweat because it was such a monster to drive. But it turned out that it was a V12 and it was very, very thirsty. So to make sure that when they did a fuel check at the end of the race, to make sure they were abiding by the rules, he would be furiously pumping a hand pump underneath the seat to inflate a bladder in the fuel tank to cut off a load of the volume. So that and he told this story about, I don't think I'm misquoting, he's saying, well, that's why I was knackered. It wasn't because it was a V12, because on the warm down lap, I knew I had to pump this thing like 40 times to fill up the bladder.
Wow.
And there's amazing stories of just ingenious cheats. I mean, there's so many of them. I mean, Formula One is about not getting caught. That's really what it's about. You know, what's the line between interpreting rules and not getting caught? And I love all of that. And I have a few times said to people I know in those sports, can I write that book? Will you tell me? They went, no, I won't tell you any of the stories. I'll tell them to you now as a friend, but if they're ever published, I'm a dead man.
Right, because all the money involved.
But the ingenious cheating, I mean, in 1995, Toyota was excluded from the World Rally Championship because it just had a brilliantly simple piece of cheating. All the World Rally cars were turbocharged, and you have what's called a restrictor, an intake restrictor. So you actually make sure that you can't take more than a certain amount of air into the turbocharger, which should limit the power and make it a level playing field. But they created this brilliantly simple bypass valve that meant that when the car was running, the air would just go round, and the intake restrictor was completely redundant. What they didn't realise was that the World Rally Championship had a couple of situations where the cars would run side by side. It would be a drag race. And so the Toyota just fucked off into the distance. And everyone went, well, they're cheating, aren't they? And then they found it. But this was perpetrated by Toyota, by a car company. And I suppose those things I find fascinating. So
wouldn't you tell them to don't get ahead in the straightaway?
They didn't tell the driver and co-driver didn't know.
Dirty.
They just knew that sometimes when they got in the car, someone did that with a lever.
Wow.
They didn't know.